like to welcome you all this evening to the first What It Takes talk hosted by the Alumni. So thanks to the Alumni for putting this event on. I'm really delighted to announce our Alumni speaker for today's talk, Anastasia Vinnikova, who will be sharing her insights into what it takes to develop resilience and also to stay motivated. So Anastasia graduated from Westminster in 2014 with a BA in Business Management, specialising in Human Resources Management. She is the Wellbeing Lead at the Bank of England and is a former member of the Commission for Equality in Mental Health and a co-chair of the Thriving from the Start Network, which is a mental health network for those early on in their careers or about to finish their studies and transition into the world of work. In this talk, Anastasia is going to look at how, rather than always being positive and strong, which is often a kind of theme around resilience, actually acknowledging your vulnerability can be a key part of developing resilience. She's also going to help you to identify some common challenges to motivation and resilience, such as things like peer pressure, job hunts, social pressure, and toxic professionalism.
Thank you so much for having me today. So I studied at Westminster. I would kind of describe myself as a mental health advocate. I'm very, very passionate about mental health and wellbeing. And I used to be a competitive figure skater, which is, I think, usually an interesting fact to share, because I think that the kind of sporting world has given me a really, really interesting insight into things like resilience, motivation. But it also prompted me to found Winning Minds last year, which is an online resource for sports people, just acknowledging that actually it can be really, really challenging to understand your own mental health and kind of educate yourself around mental health when you are in the world of sport, where things can be a little bit more skewed. We can't think about resilience unless we have to think about mental health and well-being. The thing about mental health and well-being is that the scope of the conversation has really changed. So if we think about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what societal attitudes were like towards mental health, we've really, really come on leaps and bounds. That means that things have changed, and for the better. There's lots of successes that we can count, lots more high-profile individuals sharing their experiences of mental ill health, lots more support available, institutions like universities providing more frameworks of education and support around mental health. But at the same time, something that's happened is that the goalposts have changed. So when we first started talking about mental health, no one was talking about it. So there was just that kind of initial goal of let's just get somebody talking about it. Whoever it is, somebody needs to talk about it. And we've got past that barrier. And what we need to understand is actually that there are new complexities. Different demographics, different communities have very different experiences of mental health and well-being. Even if we think about kind of recent history and some of the things that we've been through, not just talking about the pandemic, but different kind of economic, social, political changes, they're all complex and they're all going to have an impact on our own psychological well-being. And all of that kind of compounded also means that there's lots of structural stuff that's going on. That means that there's lots of health inequalities, and what that means is that we're not all going through the same mental health journey, and that's really important, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, specifically in the context of youth. So you as either students or those that have left education not too long ago, maybe you're in the first few years of your career, maybe you are on the job search, there are some really, really important complexities that are worth acknowledging within your own context, which might be impacting your mental health and subsequently how resilient you feel and how motivated you feel. So in the context of that, what actually is resilience? Because I suppose that if we're going through kind of a period of poor mental health, resilience is the thing that we're told to look for. We want to find resilience so that we can get through kind of difficult times. The dictionary defines resilience either as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, or the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. And we can think about what does that look like kind of in people. And I think that that gives us a good idea of, what is it that we actually associate with resilience. But I think that there's also two important factors here. Firstly, that resilience might mean different things to different people. I know that there's an agreed definition. I know that there's kind of this dictionary definition. But depending on the context of your circumstances, your resilience might look different to somebody else's resilience. And that might depend on the circumstances that you're in, type of person that you are. And there's also a recognition, which I think is so important, particularly if anyone is anxious as a human being like I am. There's this recognition that actually we can't always control difficult circumstances or events that happen to us, but what we can try to control is our approach to trying to overcome them. It's important that we consider the importance of vulnerability before we get onto the conversation around, well, how do you develop resilience? How do you make yourself have this toughness? I think it's really important to consider that I don't think that being a strong person means that you have to have an absence of vulnerability. Vulnerability, when you think about it, is such a raw and such a human experience. I think it's powerful even to have those experiences. So why would we want to have a life that's absent of them? I also think that vulnerability can help us understand the world around us, but also to develop compassion and empathy, which I think is so crucial when we build connections with other people. Kind of moving back onto resilience and motivation as concepts, there's lots of barriers and obstacles to the concept of resilience and motivation. And I think we have to kind of think about what they are, because very often it's so overwhelming. If you're feeling demotivated, if you're feeling that you don't have resilience and you'd like to develop some, it's a very overwhelming concept to say, well, I must just get some motivation from somewhere, or I must become resilient. It's important to kind of have a think about what we can do practically. I think that some of the things that are important can seem really basic, and before I go into them, I'm conscious that I'm in a role in wellbeing, which I think very often on the surface can seem fluffy, but actually it takes a lot of time and effort to look after yourself and to build resilience, to build motivation. It's very worth it, but it also means that actually sometimes we have to strip it back and get back to basics and do some really simple things that can kind of reset where we are, so that we can feel like we are able to build that resilience and we are able to build that motivation. So thank you. Really good questions. I think that you have to make a decision for yourself about which vulnerabilities you feel happy to share. And I think that if you've decided, actually, I would like to share some of my vulnerabilities, firstly, there's kind of this question of who would you like to share them with? Is it somebody that you feel safe with? Is it somebody that you trust? There's no suggestion that you should go and speak to a stranger and absolutely share with them the most intimate details of your life that are vulnerable to you. So I think that there is something about understanding, are you talking to someone who you trust, that you feel safe with, that you feel that you can share these things with, and you can trickle in some elements of vulnerability. And I think vulnerability can be as easy as just being honest. So for example, how many times have you been asked the question, how are you? And you say, yeah, I'm fine. Or I'm fine, I'm just tired. When in reality, maybe you're not fine. That's a good way to test the waters of share a vulnerability. Actually, I've had a really bad day because this morning XYZ happened. You can start to kind of get a feeling for what is that person's reaction going to be like to your vulnerability, and having shared that slight little thing, do you feel safe in that context? And that might help you to identify actually which people do you want to share those vulnerabilities with. And I think that that's really important, because if you can test the waters, if you can really make sure that you're speaking to someone that you trust and feel safe with, you're less likely to be taken advantage of. There's kind of two sides to the question, and I think the first thing that I'd say is that boundary setting. If someone does turn to you for support, it's important for you to recognise what you can offer them, but also your limitations. You can't take the place of someone's counsellor. I think there's a lot to be said for equipping yourself to understand, what does the process look like if you would like to speak to your GP and seek some therapy? What's that going to look like? There's loads of fantastic information on the NHS website around what's that actually going to look like? What does a referral look like? What do you talk to your GP about? What will they suggest? What will your first appointment with your therapist look like? So equipping yourself with that kind of information, understanding what might depression look like, what might anxiety look like, what does bipolar disorder mean, can go a long way for you to be able to effectively guide that person to some longer term support that you might not be able to offer. But I think obviously there are things that we can do to support that person, but also day to day to kind of, if for example, let's say we have a friend that's struggling with their mental health or is looking for some support, what are the things that we can do? Some of my top tips are, firstly, asking people how they are twice. So research suggests that when you ask someone how they are the first time, you're not going to get an honest answer. So it's a case of ask them again. Maybe not immediately, don't just say, how are you? How are you? Maybe you say, how are you really? Or actually, I've noticed that you're not yourself. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Are you really okay? So I think that that's really important. I think that actually listening is super important. There's a free online training by the Samaritans. It's called Wellbeing in the Workplace, but I think it's applicable to everything that you do. It's modular, it's online, so you don't have to do it all in one sitting, but essentially it teaches you active listening skills.